America in 1974 was a different world. One where extending your thumb at the edge of a highway wasn't just a desperate measure, but a common practice. Hitchhiking represented freedom, spontaneity, and connection in those days. You could stand roadside with your thumb extended and typically expect a ride within minutes. Most journeys ended exactly as planned, with grateful travelers reaching their destinations safely. But hidden among the sea of well-intentioned drivers were predators waiting for opportunity, and some passengers who climbed into those vehicles vanished into tragic anonymity, their journeys ending in unspeakable violence. For Mary Kathleen Schleiss, a single decision to accept a ride forever altered the course of her promising life and launched a 5-decade search for justice. Born on November 4, 1948, Mary grew up in the welcoming community of Champlain. Public records show she completed her family as the youngest child to parents Arnold and Louise Schleiss. Everyone who knew the family described a warm, stable home environment where Mary's innate creativity found constant encouragement and nourishment. Those closest to her remember a child seemingly born with artistic tools in hand, rarely seen without pens or paintbrushes clutched in her eager fingers. Her childhood artwork adorned refrigerators and walls, early indicators of the talent that would shape her future. According to friends and teachers who witnessed her development, Mary belonged to that rare category of children for whom artistic expression wasn't just an activity, but an essential form of communication. Throughout her teenage years, Mary continued to excel academically, while her artistic abilities matured remarkably. Her high school teachers recognized something special in her work, a unique perspective and technical skill that separated her from her peers. When autumn leaves transformed the landscape in 1966, Mary took her considerable talents to the University of Minnesota, embarking on a formal education in fine arts with unshakable enthusiasm. The university's vibrant creative atmosphere proved perfect for Mary's blossoming abilities. She embraced every opportunity the institution offered, participating in exhibitions, workshops, and collaborative projects that expanded her artistic vocabulary. Her hunger for knowledge extended beyond classroom walls, leading her to study abroad programs where she immersed herself in European landscapes, languages, and traditions. Travel became her secondary classroom, each new country offering fresh perspectives and inspiration. By her early 20s, Mary had achieved impressive linguistic fluency in German and Danish, and had begun exploring Japanese, a reflection of her extraordinary intellectual curiosity and determination. Her multilingual abilities opened doorways to cultures and communities most aspiring artists only read about in textbooks. After graduating with honors and securing her art degree from the University of Minnesota, Mary rejected conventional career paths that might have provided security but limited her creative freedom. For Mary, becoming a professional artist wasn't merely an aspiration, it represented the only path worth pursuing. With this singular focus guiding her decisions, she began traveling extensively across countries and continents, documenting the world through skilled sketches in her ever-present notebook. To extend her modest budget and forge meaningful connections with locals, Mary frequently relied on hitchhiking, believing these spontaneous encounters enriched both her artistic perspective and cultural understanding. Each ride represented not just transportation, but an opportunity for the human connection that informed her artwork. Despite her considerable travel experience and natural caution, Mary couldn't anticipate the danger awaiting her on what seemed like an ordinary February day. By early 1974, at 25 years old, Mary was enthusiastically planning another artistic adventure, a trip to Chicago for an exhibition where she would connect with fellow artists and potentially expand her professional network. The morning of February 15, 1974, arrived with biting cold that might have deterred less determined travelers, but Mary set out at 10:30 a.m. from Minneapolis with characteristic optimism. Standing beside the highway with her thumb extended and a handmade sign indicating Madison as her intermediate destination, she planned to catch another ride to Chicago from there, a journey she had successfully completed numerous times without incident. During this period, national campaigns desperately warned women against hitchhiking as alarming reports of violence against female hitchhikers increased across the country. Radio announcements, newspaper articles, and public service messages highlighted the growing dangers. But Mary, with an independent spirit and confidence built through extensive travel experience, trusted her judgment and intuition. Fate intervened when she accepted a ride from a man slightly older than herself, driving a sporty blue Chevy Vega that pulled alongside her in the winter morning light. The truth about what happened in the hours that followed remained hidden for half a century. The driver, expressing feelings of loneliness, seemed interested in forming a connection with Mary for reasons that would soon become horrifyingly clear. They traveled eastward on Route 94 toward Chicago, engaging in what Mary likely believed was friendly conversation between strangers sharing a journey, but they would only make it as far as Springbrook Township, a mere 90 miles from where Mary had first been picked up, a fraction of her intended journey. Initially, Mary believed this stranger was helping her reach Chicago out of simple human kindness, the unspoken social contract that governed thousands of hitchhiking experiences daily across America. However, his behavior gradually transformed, becoming increasingly inappropriate as he made suggestive comments and unwelcome advances. The conversation shifted from friendly to threatening as he veered from the freeway onto a secluded road where isolation would become his ally. Once hidden from passing traffic, he made his true intentions unmistakably clear. He leaned toward Mary, explicitly requesting sexual contact. When she firmly rejected him, physically pulling away from his advances, the situation escalated into nightmare territory. The driver produced a knife, threatening Mary with immediate violence if she didn't comply with his demands. Despite national advisories suggesting women should submit to such attacks to preserve their lives, a tragic reflection of the limited options society offered women facing violence, Mary refused to surrender her dignity and autonomy. She attempted to escape the vehicle, reaching for the door handle in a desperate bid for freedom. In response, her attacker slammed on the brakes in the snow-covered woodland and charged around the car with his weapon drawn. Mary struggled through the deep snow, her boots sinking with each frantic step, but couldn't outpace her pursuer. Once captured, she faced his blade with the courage that had carried her independently across continents. Mary fought bravely against overwhelming odds, flailing her arms to block his relentless attacks. But her resistance couldn't overcome his violent determination. The assault that followed was brutal and merciless, a savage expression of rage against a woman who had dared refuse him. Mary endured 15 separate stab wounds to her back, abdomen, and chest, each strike diminishing her strength to fight back. One particularly devastating blow severed a major artery, causing rapid blood loss that ultimately led to unconsciousness as her life force drained into the pristine snow. As Mary lay bleeding in the crimson-stained winter landscape, her attacker wasn't yet satisfied with his violence. He further disfigured her facial features by striking her repeatedly with a heavy object between her eyes and above her nose, fracturing bones and causing catastrophic facial trauma. Police reports would later indicate that after this horrific attack, he placed Mary's unconscious body in his car trunk and drove along 408th Avenue until reaching a dead end, an isolated spot perfectly suited for disposing of evidence without witnesses. The killer methodically planned to drag Mary's body from his trunk to a roadside ditch where he could conceal it beneath snow and vegetation, erasing evidence of his crime. However, as he pulled her through the frost-covered brush, fate intervened when he spotted an approaching vehicle in the distance. Abandoning his grim task mid-completion, he rushed back to his car, executed a hasty U-turn, and sped away from the scene, disappearing from Springbrook Township for what would ultimately extend to 50 years before justice could catch up with him. The approaching driver was Dennis Anderson, accompanied only by his dog on what had been intended as a casual drive through this rural area. Dennis witnessed someone hurriedly leaving in what he believed was a gold Chevy Vega, a detail that would later prove slightly inaccurate but nonetheless valuable. He described the fleeing suspect as a white male approximately 6 feet tall with auburn hair and a distinctive thick dark mustache. More disturbingly, Dennis noticed something unsettling as the car disappeared. What appeared to be a human form partially visible in a roadside ditch. Shocked by this disturbing discovery, he immediately drove home to inform his wife, but conscience quickly compelled him to return and confirm whether the person might still be alive and in need of medical assistance. Dennis recruited his neighbor for support during this grim task, and by 1:15 p.m., they reached the ditch again with trepidation. Their worst fears materialized. They found a woman's body showing no vital signs, partially concealed by disturbed snow. The two men rushed to the nearest residence to contact authorities, hearts pounding with the gravity of their discovery. When they returned to the scene, they found a delivery driver had also stumbled upon the body and was visibly shaken by the gruesome sight. Police arrived shortly thereafter, documenting the horrific scene with professional detachment masking their own emotional responses. Mary had been stabbed multiple times and discarded in the snow like unwanted refuse. Her purse and identification were missing, leaving investigators initially unable to determine her identity. The only potential evidence at the scene was a black and orange stocking cap resting in the blood-stained snow, along with Dennis Anderson's description of the car and driver. Details that would later prove partially inaccurate, but nonetheless important to the investigation. The investigation immediately faced two critical challenges: identifying both the victim and the perpetrator of this senseless violence. The first question was answered relatively quickly, but in the most painful way possible when Mary's brother underwent the traumatic experience of formally identifying his sister's body, an emotional wound that would never fully heal. The second question, who committed this heinous crime, would remain unanswered for more than 5 decades, despite an extensive investigation spanning half a century and multiple generations of dedicated law enforcement officers. Following established procedure, police circulated a composite sketch based on Dennis Anderson's eyewitness description. This action led to several innocent men being brought in for questioning simply because they happened to resemble the drawing. Each underwent intense scrutiny before being eventually cleared after providing verifiable alibis, leaving investigators with no viable suspects and growing frustration. Attention then naturally turned to Dennis himself, as first discoverers of bodies often receive heightened scrutiny in homicide investigations. Officers found certain aspects of his behavior suspicious, particularly his decision to leave the scene without checking for signs of life, and his somewhat unusual explanation for being in such a remote location. He claimed he was there because his dog wanted to continue their drive rather than return home, an explanation that raised skeptical eyebrows among experienced investigators accustomed to hearing fabricated stories. Over subsequent years, Dennis faced repeated questioning. Detectives employed various tactical approaches to uncover potential inconsistencies in his account, but his testimony remained remarkably unchanged across numerous interviews, and physical evidence eventually supported his innocence. Investigators focused increasingly on the only tangible physical evidence: the distinctive hat found at the crime scene containing several fine hairs. In the early 1970s, forensic science operated with significant limitations, without access to advanced DNA testing procedures or comprehensive genetic databases. Technicians examined the recovered hairs microscopically, comparing color, structure, and distinctive patterns under laboratory conditions. These hairs didn't match samples from Dennis, prompting police to expand comparisons to known violent offenders operating in the region. When all comparisons failed to yield conclusive matches, the investigation gradually stalled despite investigators' best efforts and determination. Mary's case reluctantly joined the growing ranks of unsolved mysteries, cold cases where grieving families wait endlessly for answers that might never arrive. Years accumulated into decades, and investigators at the Dunn County Sheriff's Office eventually prioritized active cases with fresher leads and greater likelihood of resolution. But Mary's family steadfastly refused to abandon hope for eventual justice. In the late 2000s, that hope received meaningful reinforcement when the department's specialized cold case unit announced they would systematically revisit Mary's murder, leveraging advances in forensic technology that hadn't existed during the original investigation. They planned to sequence DNA from the hairs preserved from the orange and black hat, a scientific approach impossible in 1974. By 2009, they took an even more significant investigative step by exhuming Mary's body, searching for any biological evidence that might remain preserved, particularly under her fingernails if she had scratched her attacker while fighting desperately for her life. Forensic experts combined biological material recovered from her preserved fingernails with samples from the hat to develop a partial male DNA profile. This scientific breakthrough represented the first significant advancement in decades. The resulting profile was entered into CODIS, the national DNA database containing genetic information from convicted offenders across the country, but returned no matches. The killer's DNA wasn't present in the system, and the case reluctantly resumed its dormancy despite this promising development. Mary's family continued their patient wait for answers that seemed increasingly unlikely to materialize. The genuine breakthrough finally arrived in 2022, when Dunn County formed a partnership with specialists in investigative genetic genealogy at Ramapo College in New Jersey. These experts possessed sophisticated tools and methodologies that could search far beyond traditional law enforcement databases by examining extended family trees to identify potential biological relatives, a revolutionary approach to cold case investigation. This process demanded more time than initially anticipated due to the partial nature of the DNA sequence available. But by late 2023, they had identified a promising family lineage that narrowed the field of potential suspects dramatically. Only 2 men nationwide matched the genealogical profile established by researchers, cousins living separately in Wyoming and Michigan. Both willingly provided DNA samples for comparison when contacted by investigators, confident in their personal innocence. When laboratory analysis confirmed these samples failed to match the crime scene DNA, temporary confusion threatened to derail the investigation's momentum. After 2 years of intensive scientific work and resource allocation, the promising trail appeared to end abruptly without resolution. Then someone involved in the investigation posed a crucial question that would ultimately crack the case wide open. What if the constructed family tree contained critical gaps? What if adoption had created branches invisible to traditional genealogical research methods? In early 2024, this insightful hypothesis yielded results. Investigators discovered a previously overlooked woman in the genealogical database related to the 2 previous suspects, but clearly too young to have been involved in the 1974 crime. When questioned by investigators, she provided information leading them to her biological relative, an 84-year-old man living quietly alone in Minnesota. With the understanding that time might be running short given the suspect's advanced age, the cold case team pursued this lead with renewed urgency. On October 19, 2024, they conclusively identified Mary's killer, John K. Miller, who had evaded justice for over 50 years while living within driving distance of the crime scene. When police officers arrived at Miller's modest suburban home, his reaction spoke volumes about his awareness of unresolved guilt. Opening the door to uniformed officers, he immediately understood why they had come without requiring explanation. Instead of protesting or expressing confusion, he calmly invited them inside for a conversation in his living room. Seated in his wheelchair, Miller openly confessed to the murder that had remained unsolved for 5 decades, providing details only the killer could know. He admitted picking up Mary while she was hitchhiking, making unwanted sexual advances during the drive, and stabbing her repeatedly when she rightfully refused his propositions. The forensic examination of her preserved wounds confirmed his account, revealing evidence of a desperate struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. Miller acknowledged attempting to hide her body in a snowbank before hastily abandoning the effort when another car approached, Dennis Anderson's vehicle that had inadvertently interrupted the final stage of his crime. Perhaps most disturbing was Miller's matter-of-fact admission that after fleeing the scene, he simply never thought about his victim again, displaying a profound absence of remorse for the vibrant life he had extinguished or the family he had irreparably damaged. According to his statement, he never committed another similar violent crime after Mary's murder, even expressing a detached disbelief at his own capacity for such extreme violence that February day, as though the killer had been someone else entirely, not the man who lived 5 subsequent decades in unremarkable anonymity. By the way, who exactly was John Miller? The man who had escaped accountability for so long. For nearly 50 years, he maintained a quiet, unremarkable presence in his community, the archetypal neighbor who rarely drew attention or inspired significant memories among those who encountered him daily. Born May 2, 1940, and adopted as an infant, public records reveal little about his early developmental years or family circumstances. As he reached adulthood, however, a disturbing pattern gradually emerged in his behavior that might have served as warning signs had they been connected. By the 1960s, while many of his contemporaries were establishing families or answering the call to military service in Vietnam, Miller was instead beginning a troubling criminal career that would escalate over time. In his early 20s, he served prison time for forgery offenses, crimes of deception that demonstrated his willingness to violate social norms and legal boundaries. This period of incarceration evidently failed to inspire reformation, and after release, he adopted a nomadic lifestyle, wandering across state lines while engaging in increasingly serious criminal activity. The decade of the 1960s saw him implicated in at least 3 separate burglaries, 2 in his hometown of Austin, Minnesota, and others farther away in Texas, suggesting an unsettled, lawless existence characterized by opportunistic predation rather than community connection. In 1965, Arizona authorities arrested him for attempted robbery, adding another state to his expanding criminal territory. By 1969, he had graduated to armed robbery in California, threatening a terrified convenience store employee with a loaded firearm, an offense serious enough to send him to the notorious San Quentin prison, where he served several years among hardened criminals. Official court documents confirm Miller completed his mandated sentence and gained release on May 5, 1972, ostensibly prepared to reintegrate into society. He married in 1973, apparently attempting to construct a normal life with traditional relationships and responsibilities. Yet within less than a year of this apparent stabilization, he committed the brutal murder of Mary Kathleen Schleiss before returning to everyday life, continuing his existence without apparent guilt or psychological burden for nearly 5 decades. Miller would later describe himself during police interviews as fundamentally cold-blooded, a chilling self-assessment that proved devastatingly accurate when examining his capacity to compartmentalize extreme violence. Throughout the late 1970s and subsequent decades, Miller maintained a deliberately low profile in a small city, avoiding further serious legal entanglements until his arrest for Mary's murder brought his carefully constructed normality crashing down. During intensive questioning following his apprehension, investigators naturally explored potential connections to other unsolved cases, particularly the 1972 killing of 16-year-old Jody Trulson, whose circumstances shared disturbing similarities with Mary's murder. Jody was last seen hitchhiking near what was then called Lake Calhoun, where a friend witnessed her entering a gold-colored vehicle driven by a man in his 30s with distinctive shoulder-length brown hair. By the following morning, July 4th, the young girl was found dead, her body discovered near a creek with catastrophic head injuries. Forensic evidence indicated she died almost instantly from these powerful blows before being dragged to the location where she was ultimately found by passers-by. As of this writing, Miller hasn't been formally charged with Jody's murder, though he remains a significant suspect under active investigation. Experienced detectives believe the calculated, emotionless nature of Mary's killing strongly suggests it might not have represented Miller's first homicide. Few killers begin with such methodical violence without prior escalation. Miller has categorically denied involvement in Jody's death, notably pointing out that his car was distinctively blue rather than gold as described by witnesses. However, his self-described cold-blooded psychological makeup raises troubling questions about other potential victims who might have crossed his path during his active years, particularly given his demonstrated willingness to harm vulnerable women. Following his arrest for Mary's murder, Miller strategically opted to plead guilty rather than face a public trial, consistently adhering to his original confession while minimizing additional details that might connect him to other unsolved cases. On March 27, 2025, John Keith Miller received a life sentence after formally pleading no contest to the 1974 murder of 25-year-old Mary Kathleen Schleiss. The sentencing proceeding in Dunn County Circuit Court represented the culmination of a 50-year investigation ultimately resolved through cutting-edge forensic genetic genealogy techniques unavailable to the original investigators. Miller deliberately chose not to deliver any statement during the sentencing hearing, but acknowledged through his attorney his complete lack of remorse throughout the intervening decades, effectively confirming his previous self-assessment as fundamentally cold-blooded in emotional constitution. While justice arrived decades too late to provide immediate comfort to Mary's parents, who passed away still awaiting answers, Miller will conclusively never again experience freedom or have opportunities to harm others. Members of Mary's extended family attended the emotionally charged sentencing hearing, but thoughtfully chose not to deliver victim impact statements during the formal proceedings. Afterward, they released a carefully prepared statement expressing profound gratitude to the dedicated professionals at the Dunn County Sheriff's Office and the specialized college research team whose combined efforts spanned 5 decades and never abandoned the search for truth. Mary's niece Nina, born years after her aunt's tragic death, shared with assembled journalists that the family plans to visit the University of Minnesota campus where Mary once held numerous promising art exhibitions, reconnecting with the positive aspects of her abbreviated life. They collectively expressed profound relief at finally being able to celebrate Mary's vibrant 25 years of creative existence rather than focusing exclusively on the violent circumstances of her death, finding hard-won closure after a half-century of uncertainty and unanswered questions. The presiding judge ordered Miller to pay over $2,000 in restitution to Mary's family, who immediately announced their heartfelt intention to donate these funds directly to the college research team instrumental in solving the case, publicly acknowledging that without their specialized expertise and persistence, justice might never have been achieved in their lifetime. While cold cases statistically rarely find satisfactory resolution after so many decades, advances in forensic technology and investigative techniques ensured that at least this particular killer couldn't completely escape accountability for his actions, regardless of how many years had passed. Mary Kathleen Schlase's tragic story serves as a powerful reminder that while justice can be significantly delayed through circumstances and limitations, dedicated investigators armed with evolving science can ensure it isn't ultimately denied to victims and their families who wait patiently for answers. The resolution of Mary's case offers hope to countless other families living with similar uncertainty about loved ones whose cases remain unsolved. It demonstrates that no matter how cold a case becomes or how many years pass, the possibility of resolution always exists as technology advances and investigators remain committed to uncovering truth. Though Mary's young life ended tragically on that winter day in 1974, her legacy continues through the art she created, the lives she touched, and now through the advancement of justice that her case represents, ensuring that no matter how much time passes, those who commit violent acts cannot rest easy in the assumption that their crimes will remain forever hidden in the shadows of the past. Thank you for taking the time to learn about Mary Kathleen Schlitz's story and the remarkable journey to justice that spanned half a century. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments below. What aspects of this cold case resolution did you find most compelling? If you've enjoyed this exploration of true crime history and the advances in forensic science that finally brought closure to Mary's family, please consider subscribing to our channel for more thoughtfully researched stories. And if you found this account valuable, we'd greatly appreciate your support through likes and shares, which help these important stories reach others. Until next time, remember that even the coldest cases can find resolution when determined investigators refuse to let justice fade into history.